Hey, fourth graders. So today we are going to talk about the trickiest thing that we're going to encounter when it comes to finding equivalent fractions. We've talked about lots of strategies you can use to find equivalent fractions. My favorite, using the fraction tiles. We can use pictures. We can use number lines. We can use multiplication. And today we're going to talk about finding equivalent fractions with division. Now this is also called simplifying fractions. I will tell you, this is not something that you are going to have to do a lot of. Okay, so if this is something that your brain is like, oh my goodness, that's so hard, it's okay. All right, you're not going to see a lot of this, but you are going to see it. You do have a whole lesson on this, and you will see it a little bit. You are going to be using it more in the future, but it's not something that we do a lot of in fourth grade with simplifying fractions. Okay, but let's go ahead and look at it. All right, let's say that I have the fraction 3/12, and I want to find an equivalent fraction for 3/12, but I'm going to be using division. Okay, that means that my numerator and my denominator are going to be getting smaller, right? Because when we divide, our numbers get smaller. Now, just like with multiplication, where you had to multiply by a fraction equal to 1, same thing with division. That identity property exists in division too. If I divide a number by 1, the number stays the same, right? Because if I'm splitting it into only one group, I'm not actually splitting it, I'm just keeping it in the same group. Well, the same thing is going to be happening here. We want to divide by a fraction equal to 1. But how do we decide what to divide by? I can't just pick any number. Let me show you why. Let's say with multiplication, you can pick anything you want, right? And I always say start with 2. 2 is easy. Well, if I'm doing division and I divide by 2/2, 3 divided by 2, what does that equal? It has a remainder, right? It would equal 1 remainder 1. Well, we can't write 1 remainder 1 on the top of a fraction. It doesn't work that way, okay? You have to, that is incorrect. You have to divide by something you can divide 3 by. Okay, so this is going to think back to, we talked a little bit about divisibility rules back in the last semester when we were talking about factors. I want to pick a number that's a factor of both of these. Remember our factor rainbows? Let's make a quick factor rainbow. All right, I have 1 times 3 for 3. That's the only way I can multiply to get 3, right? 3 is a prime number. For 12, I can do 1 times 12. I could do 2 times 6, and I can do 3 times 4. So what numbers do we see that are in common? 1. But if I divide it by 1/1, I'm still going to have 3/12. So I'm not going to have anything different. What about 3? Could I divide this one by 3/3? I can, right? 3 divided by 3 is 1. And 12 divided by 3 is 4. What's it attached to on the factor rainbow? That helps you. So I know that 3/12 is equivalent to 1/4. Okay? So again, the key is you're still dividing it by the same numerator and denominator, but it has to be something that both numbers can be divided by. If both numbers are even, pick 2, right? If the numerator and denominator are even, you can pick 2. But if they're not, like in this case, 3 is not an even number, so I can't divide by 2. I have to pick something different. All right, let's look at another example. Let's say I have this one. You're like, oh my word, this is long. That numerator is bigger than the denominator. That's all right. It's allowed to be. It's allowed to be bigger. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. The numerator can be bigger than the denominator. That just means that fraction is worth more than 1. If the numerator is smaller than the denominator, that fraction is smaller than 1. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing though. I want to think, what number can I divide both of these by? Now, if you're really good at your multiplication facts, if you really have those down, then you probably don't even need to draw a factor rainbow. You may be able to see it right away. You may see, oh, well, both of those numbers are even. So I could divide by 2 over 2, right? Remember what I do to the top, I do to the bottom. What I do to the bottom, I do to the top. 24 divided by 2 is 12, and 12 divided by 2 is 6. So 12/6 is equivalent to 24/12. Is there other ways? Are there other ways that I could do this? Yeah, there are. Okay, if I really quick listed my factor rainbows, I see 24, 2 times 12, we just did that one, 3 times 8, and 4 times 6, right? And for 12, I have that one right up here, but I'll rewrite it for you. 1 times 12, 2 times 6, and 3 times 4. Well, what else do I see that's the same? We have 1 on both, we have 2 on both, we have 3 on both, we have 4 on both, and we have 6 on both, and we have 12 on both. So there's a lot of ways I can simplify this fraction. As long as the numerator and the denominator are the same when I'm picking what I'm dividing by, I can divide by any of those numbers that they have in common. Those are called common factors, right? I can pick any of them. Okay, so let's look at it another way that I could do it. I could do 24/12, and I'm dividing any of the numbers that are the same. Let's say I want to do it by 6. 24 divided by 6 equals 4. 12 divided by 6 equals 2. 4 over 2 is an equivalent fraction to 24/12. All right, again, as long as the numerator and the denominator are the same when I'm dividing, it's going to get us the equivalent fraction. But I can't just go back up here to 3/12. I can't be like, well, I can divide this by 3 and that by 2. That doesn't work. What you do to the top, you do to the bottom. What you do to the bottom, you do to the top. That is the key to equivalent fractions. You can only multiply or divide, because that's the only thing where we have that identity property, and you have to multiply or divide with the same numerator and denominator, because that's the only way the fraction equals 1, and that's the only way that this works. Okay, we're finding equivalent fractions because fractions are so cool, and we can represent the number 1 in a bajillion different ways, as long as the numerator and the denominator are the same. 256 over 256 still equals 1. 1 million over 1 million still equals 1. Okay? So you can use that to multiply, or if it's a factor, divide. All right? So like I said, the division's a little bit trickier because we do have this extra step. We have to find the common factor to divide by. You can't divide and end up with a remainder. And that's where it can be a little bit tricky. You can't have a remainder at the top of a fraction. That doesn't exist. That's not something that's real. Okay? So you have to have a number that you can divide the numerator and the denominator by. But as long as you can, then you can use division to find equivalent fractions. Multiplication is a much easier strategy because you can multiply by anything, right? You get to skip this factor rainbow step. But the division is a great strategy, and eventually you're going to have to learn how to simplify fractions, and we simplify fractions using division. So it is something that you do want to start getting familiar with. If your brain's like, oh my goodness, this is so hard. First of all, stop your brain and say, no, this is not so hard. Okay, I'm using things that I learned before to build on to what I'm learning now. That's how math works. Everything builds on each other. Okay, so I'm using factors to build on. If this is so hard because you don't know your multiplication facts yet, then you know I'm going to tell you, practice them. The only way you are going to get better with multiplication and feel more comfortable with multiplication, which is wrapped into everything that we're doing this year, is to practice it. Practice, 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 practice. There's lots of really fun games that you can play to practice your multiplication facts. There's apps that you can download on a tablet or a phone to practice your multiplication facts. There are online games that are free. There are paid games that you can use. There's so many ways that you can practice your multiplication facts, and you know you need to know them. So let's work on that, And then here, like I said, this is how we do division to find equivalent fractions. All right, that's our last video on equivalent fractions. Next, we're going to talk about comparing fractions, which is related, but not exactly the same. So I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye, guys.